You're tuned in to Around the Lens, the internet's only live streaming roundtable discussion podcast, featuring Zach Roberts, Ron Hamilton, Travis Keys, and your host, David J. Murphy. Hello and welcome to Around the Lens, episode 162. I am your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me as always is my co-host, Travis Keys. Hello, Travis. How are you doing tonight?
I'm back from the dead.
Looking better than ever.
Sorry I missed you guys last week, especially with a friend on.
What happened? What was it?
Oh, I went down with some awful food poisoning. I was up very early and made the mistake of coming back from a shoot where I hadn't had any sleep, grabbing some McDonald's, and I don't know, it just put me on my butt for 3 days, and then I was just weak and just recovering now. It was not fun at all.
Well, there you go. Now you learned your lesson. Don't ever eat at McDonald's, right?
Yeah, boy, it kicked my butt.
What was it? McDonald's in like New York City proper? Was it?
I was driving out of the city, and it was just just a quick drive through, and I'm like, I'll get some nuggets and power these down and go get some sleep, and I stayed in bed for 2.5 days.
Oh my gosh, jeez. Well, we're glad to have you back. Hopefully at 100%. Well, we got two awesome guests on this evening.
Nice.
Let's go ahead and introduce them. We've got, start with you, Scott Hines. Scott, tell us about yourself.
Hey guys, my name's Scott. I'm a freelance photojournalist in Brooklyn, New York. I've been working as a freelancer for about the last year and a half. Before that, I was a staffer at a website. And I'm just hustling as hard as I can to cover news both in and outside of New York, and really enjoy doing it.
You said you're a staffer?
I used to be a staffer at a website in New York called Gothamist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that website was shut down in 2017 for unionizing, a campaign that I was very much involved in. And so since then, the site has been restarted, purchased by WNYC, and now is kind of arguably bigger and better than ever. And I have freelance for them here and there kind of since they've come back. But as far as getting quote unquote my old job back, that wasn't really in the cards in their plans. And so I've kind of just tried to do my best as a freelancer. So yeah.
Yeah, we've had some guests on in the past who worked for the IST. I think they work out of the Chicago IST.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, everybody was affected by the massive layoffs. So not fun.
Yeah. It was a learning experience in a whole bunch of ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, great. Glad to have you on. We'll talk about your work in just a minute, but I do want to introduce our other guest this evening, Ben.
Hello there.
Ben Stansell. How you doing, Ben?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm a staff photographer at Agence France Presse, based in the London bureau, covering news and sport, mainly in Britain. With one or two trips to Olympics and World Cups thrown in as well.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. How is that working for? So it's a French agency, but they have a London bureau. So it's kind of like New York Times having a DC bureau.
Sure. So we're a global news agency, partially funded by the French government. I think currently we serve about 160 countries around the world. So we have bureaus all over the world. It's we cover obviously still imagery. We also have video departments and journalists also. So we cover the full range of the media.
Nice. Have you been sent to a war zone by chance since you've been working with them?
No, I haven't. I haven't ever been to a war zone. No.
Because I remember when I was in Iraq many years ago, I was there were some reporters and photographers from your agency out there. So
sure.
I just didn't know if that was something like they all cycled through you all to kind of give you that opportunity to cover some conflict photography or something, or how would that even work? I guess would the agency approach you, or would you approach the agency?
I think it's we can approach the agency. In my situation, I haven't really been around for a war such as the Iraq War. Generally, in other regions, we would use local journalists on the ground to cover these things. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you both for being on tonight. We got some great stuff to talk about, a lot of great topics. I want to jump right into your all's work. Both of you were featured on CNN's Top 100 list. So we're going to start with Scott. Scott, you had 2 photographs in the Top 100. And for our viewers, I'm actually going to bring one of the first photos up right now. And this is the Oklahoma shot inside the state, the capital of Oklahoma, where we had a protester holding signs during a rally inside the Oklahoma State Capitol building. This was basically a protest against teachers' wages. They were looking for $150 million in school funding. So talk a little bit about this photograph, how you got it, where were you positioned in this, to get this shot, kind of what you think about being featured on this list.
I mean, first it was a total surprise and obviously like huge thrill to be featured on the list. I actually walked into a kind of like photography social gathering that had kind of been organized by a few friends and acquaintances in Manhattan, and another great freelancer in New York named Stephanie Keith. She just like kind of grabbed me and was like, "Hey, you got 2 photos in CNN, congratulations." And I was like, "What?" Like I
Excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep a decent look on, try to keep watch over, my own stuff getting published and used and stuff. But when you're shooting for a wire service like Bloomberg or Getty, obviously, your photos just kind of exist in the world that you can't really, in a way that you can't ever hope to really keep track of. And so, yeah, that photo was taken, I believe, on the second day of the Oklahoma teacher strike, which was the second teacher strike that I covered last year, kind of as a freelancer who was particularly interested in this like wave of education labor actions that happened across the United States. Last year we saw teacher strikes in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, Kentucky, a few other places. And, it kind of just was the sort of story where all the stars align for you. I come from a family. My mom was a teacher for 32 years. I had a personal, history of being a union organizer. And then all of a sudden I was a freelancer and was very interested in kind of labor politics, labor issues, education. And, when West Virginia kind of went on strike it's been almost a year exactly now, late February of 2018, a friend of mine texted me and was just like, "Hey, it's 7 hours to West Virginia from Brooklyn. Do you want to get in the car and go?" And so we just went and did it. And I drove to West Virginia with this friend, like without an assignment, without any idea, just like a few contacts with teachers who were kind of like, "Yeah, if you come, we'll talk to you. You can photograph us." And so that experience, I just got extremely lucky in that like my intuition was kind of in the right spot at the right time. I got put on for an assignment, both shooting and writing for The Intercept. And then once that assignment was done and filed and put away, I was able to shoot one day for Bloomberg for their wire service in West Virginia. And so that was kind of the foundation of a month later, Oklahoma went on strike in kind of a similar fashion. And once again, the same friend and I were just like, should we get in the car and go? And we just went, and was lucky enough to get put on for another couple of days of wire service photography while I was in Oklahoma. And, that shot was taken as the rallies at the state capitol kind of grew and grew over the course of that week. And the Oklahoma State Capitol is kind of this, it's got a big rotunda in a way that like a lot of state capitals do. And I just happened to notice that I was on like the highest level that a kind of public visitor could be on, and looked down and saw these kind of like big descending rings of teachers with their signs and their red shirts and stuff, and that star down at the bottom, and wrapped my camera strap around my wrist and held my camera out there and just took a couple of Hail Mary spray and pray photos, and came back with one that worked out as far as the everything. That photo pretty quickly, when I filed my batch from the day, got the most reaction on social media and seemed to get used the most from through Bloomberg's Wire and stuff like that. So I kind of knew that it was going to be pretty early, like the photo that kind of had any sort of like longer shelf life past the strike itself. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but that was kind of the story behind the picture. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So you're not like shooting this. You're shooting this from the third story, I presume.
Yeah, the third or fourth. And again, like it's the balcony, the ledge that I was on was kind of identical to the ones that you can see below it. And I'm thankfully a tall, lanky guy who can hold the camera pretty far out over a ledge, and so I was able to just like, I think if you want to get technical, like I put my lens on 24 and just like held it over and probably took a full 11 shots until my buffer filled, and was just like, well, something in here will be usable. And that worked. And like, the funny thing about that picture is there's another, I can't remember his name, and I should remember, there's another photographer who was shooting for the AP that day that got pretty much the same identical shot. And I think he filed like 2 hours before me. And so that photo I saw, used on, I think like one of the newspapers in Oklahoma the next day on the front page. And like, it got a lot more kind of print play, which I think, I wasn't like upset or anything. It's like, that's just how it goes shooting breaking news. But it was just funny to experience how like two photographers can kind of be in the same place, see a very, clear, like this is a photo that'll work, even though it's kind of more of a conceptual photo and doesn't really, it's a very graphic image. I kind of tend to prefer photos that show people's more like personal emotions in their faces and, gives you an idea of what they're going through. This was just kind of like a, here are some shapes and kind of a strange picture that kind of like, weirds you out a little bit when you first look at it. So yeah, that was just like a fun, validating experience. I didn't have a lot of wire photography experience before I went and covered these teacher strikes. And given that I kind of have a vested interest in these issues to begin with, and it's kind of been something last year that I can point to as like one of the more like productive like steps up that I've taken in my career. It was just like a really, really, I was over the moon to kind of get some professional recognition for something that I also really felt was important.
I think what's neat about this photo is not just that you're showcasing, the people and their lives and what they're going through, but the fact that you can see what people are doing on their phones. So it's like, all right, so okay, there's on Facebook, he's checking his email. No, but it is, I thought it was kind of funny how many people like have their phones out. At least you can see from this vantage point all those screens out there. But I was going to say, like, you didn't use any special tools to get this shot. You weren't, like, flying a drone inside the State House. You didn't have a extended monopod trying to get, over.
I mean, I have...
Just you were tall.
It's all I can do to have a grasp on the gear that I have. Like, using more than one lens on a day is kind of as much juggling as I can do in my head. No, I mean, like I said, I'm 6'4". I was able to kind of lean over and make sure that I didn't drop the camera, and that was it. So, yeah.
And what camera were you shooting this with?
Yeah, exace
Was it a Sony, and why wasn't it a Sony?
Why? Why was it?
No, I'm just kidding. What camera did you shoot with?
I use a 5D Mark III.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, when I was running around in Oklahoma and in West Virginia, I was doing the basic 5D with a 2470 and a 7200, and I don't have two bodies, so I was just switching lenses here and there. Thankfully, like I don't shoot a lot of sports or something where I have to be able to just like seamlessly go from one camera to the next. If I had more gear and more money, I would do that, but I also just don't really like going out into the field, especially when you're shooting for a wire service and you're going to have to file kind of midway through whatever it is that you're covering. I don't really like having a laptop and two bodies and all this stuff. It's funny, like I use big, heavy, full frame cameras. I haven't moved to mirrorless or done any, kind of small. I have friends that shoot with, they've found smaller cameras that kind of solve the question for them. But I still like to have as little as possible while still using the cameras that I feel really kind of like functionally comfortable with. So that's my like gear philosophy, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah.
Any questions on this photo before we move on to the next, guys? No? Okay. let's go on to your second shot, which, by the way, you can tell that other photographer who was featured in print. I got featured in CNN's Top 100, so in your face.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to be that combative about things, but sometimes it's fun to be a little competitive.
Come on, guys. We all know this job is a blood sport. All right. So your other photo featured in CNN's Top 100 was of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez celebrating her win. And this was on June 26th. So this was, right after the elections. And it was in the New York's 14th district. 28-year-old Latina Democratic Socialist running her first political campaign. So obviously you're there at the moment, and it looks like you're at the right place, right time, catching the right moment. Talk to us a little bit about this, because we had another photographer on who talked about his experience and just kind of following her as a candidate and whatnot. And probably he was at the same event that you were at, but kind of just go over sort of how you kind of got connected with this candidate and why you're there and kind of shooting the shot.
Yeah, so I mean, there's kind of a long story that goes into this shot. It basically, when I worked at Gothamist in the fall of 2017, you remember Hurricane Maria happened in September,
right?
And I had kind of thought and talked with other reporters at the website about trying to figure out a story that we could do about like a New York angle on the hurricane. We were thinking about trying to find Puerto Ricans who had family members down that they couldn't get a hold of or things like that. And I use Twitter a lot. I try to use it as a way to find story ideas and get a hold of sources and stuff. I think photographers are way too kind of averse to using Twitter because they think that it's not for them. And I think that frankly, there's so much bigger of a conversation going on, not just amongst journalists, but about people who often become sources or subjects and stuff, that, having not just a useless Twitter that you only use once a year, but actually showing that you're talking about and engaging in the topics that you want to cover is really good, and frankly not that much work, and you can learn a lot from it. And so I just got on Twitter and started looking for New Yorkers who were talking about Maria, and I found this woman's Twitter who was making these really, really just powerfully bold statements and condemnations of the way that the Trump administration was handling the hurricane, and seemed to have this very multi-layered analysis of what was going on. And so I reached out and actually just DM'd her, and it was Ocasio-Cortez, and I was like, hey, I'm a reporter from Gothamist, and I would love to just ask you a couple of questions about what's going on, because she had family who was down there in Puerto Rico that they couldn't get a hold of, people who needed medication, things. So before she was ever a politician or on kind of people's radar as a progressive or a democratic socialist or a whoever, political symbol that she is now, she to me was just a person who seemed like it would be wise to talk to. And so her and I had a couple of 10-minute phone conversations in September of 2017, and I walked away from those phone conversations just really struck at how strong of a speaker she was, how cohesive and kind of well put together her arguments were. And I kind of thought to myself, this is someone to kind of keep an eye on. And so when she announced her campaign against Joe Crowley for the New York, that congressional primary, I was this might be more than just a, performative campaign. She's got some substance as a person, as a woman who can make her argument just extremely well. And so I kept an eye on that for, the weeks and months as the campaign went on. And she did get a bit of media coverage during her primary campaign, but it was mostly from kind of the online left media in New York. I think she was mentioned once in a New York Times article in passing before that primary. So it was still kind of off the radar. And you got to know, Joe Crowley was in line to be number 2 to Nancy Pelosi before he lost. He was a hugely powerful, well-established Democrat, really just counted on having practically no turnout in any of the primaries that he would ever be challenged in, and was just was seen as a very safe seat. And so for her to run on this very, very far left platform, I was kind of wow, if this happens, it would be a huge, huge deal. And so I just reached out to her press team, which at the time was not nearly as swamped and as hard to get a hold of as it is now, obviously. And was like, hey, I'm a freelance photographer. Here's some of my past work. I would love to get some, put on the press list for this primary party. And they were like, yeah, sure, sounds good. And so I went up there on, like I said, June 26th, rode the train up to the Bronx, did not have an assignment. I walked in about 45 seconds after she had been announced the winner. And so immediately started taking pictures and just kind of looked around and realized, oh man, there's nobody here. Like, there were two other photographers in the room. One of them was her campaign photographer, a woman named Corey, who's really nice and who I've kind of met a few times.
Is it the lady in the back behind her?
Yes, with the camera.
Doing the offshoot camera, offshoot flash.
Yeah, she rocks. Corey's a fantastic photographer. I like her a lot. And then there was a guy, I can't remember his name. He uses an Instagram handle that is like Un-American something. And he's more of a long-form documentary photographer who I believe published a kind of expansive black and white photo essay about AOC in the New Yorker a few weeks or months after she won that primary. But it was like just the three of us. There were no other wire photographers. There was no newspaper photographers there. And so, like, I shoot for maybe about 45 minutes, and one of the pictures I took was that one that we're talking about. And then I just pull out my phone and I texted Pierce Wright from Getting Images and was like, hey man, I'm here and she just won and I have pictures. Do you want to put me on assignment and buy these pictures from me? And Pierce was like, yes, God, yes, please, please. And so like I sit down and file and, it was like I try not to get too, proud about it, but it was very validating to be filing photos of a story that I kind of had just been keeping track of for months, that I went up to without an assignment on my own news intuition. And as I'm sending the photos to Getty, I see the New York Post photographer run in late, and I see the freelancer of the Times run in late. And, some of these people are like my friends or colleagues and stuff. And, I didn't want to give them any hard time, but, to know that like to some level I had scooped some of these other outlets, not only by being there first, but by just like going up there when they didn't even think to assign someone, was very, very nice. And you got to remember, like, that night she became the biggest political news story in the country for quite a while. And the thing that really gave those...
She actually turned out to be someone your instincts were on? Wait, what?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the other thing about Ocasio was just that, like, there was such a rush to cover about her because so many people were just like, who is she? What's going on? How did this happen? And I was kind of like chuckling because it made kind of perfect sense to me, like why she won. But it wasn't like she had ran a very visible campaign where there were, wire service photographers and newspaper photographers shooting her. And there was this big pool of imagery of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There was like a weird kind of 2-week period where like my photos were the only things that could be used if you were going to write any kind of story about her. And so as a result, those photos got a ton of play. And I was glad that, it worked out well for Getty and that I could be, we could all sit around here and kind of talk about how working for a wire service has many disadvantages and, that the contracts never get any better. And, you can, a lot of different reasons to criticize that working relationship. But I think one of the most validating and nice things that is special to working for a wire service is that your photos can be used so broadly and for such a long amount of time that at some level, as a photographer who cares about news, you got to feel good about the fact that your vision and your images are being the things that are used to represent these people and these stories in a broad way. And so I felt very, like gratified and just like it felt good to be the one that took those pictures. So that was kind of the nice end to that experience. Yeah.
I just want to let everybody know that the other photographer who was there that night is named Jose Alvarado, and I'm showing his photograph from that same event. So those of you who are watching the stream, you can see that. So again, he had been following Miss Cortez, Ocasio-Cortez, for a long time before she actually got before she won. So like he was practically her second photographer, and. So again, great to see, congratulations to her and, obviously an awesome moment there captured. Of course, has she seen the photo? Have you gotten any feedback from her about the photo? Because I know that it's not like super duper flattering. I mean, it's a great shot, great emotional shot, but I'm sure from her perspective, it's like, oh, geez.
I mean, the picture that I like the most from that set, I got a photo of her cutting into and having a bit of frosting from a cake, like a victory cake that they had brought out to her. I think that photo has only been used a couple of times. It's not the first choice that photo editors seem to go to get. I have had next to zero personal interactions with Ocasio-Cortez. There were a couple of times that I've seen her campaigning for other candidates and, perhaps shared a nice, just kind of like, nice to meet you, like pleasantry. I have a feeling that her staff and communications people at least know who I am, because I shot her actual election night, like midterm election night victory party for Gothamist as a freelancer. And one of those images that I took of the crowd kind of celebrating and the confetti that she let out in her victory party, that photo got specifically like copy and pasted off of Gothamist and posted to Twitter in a tweet from her handle, and I was tagged in the picture. And then
you sued her for copyright infringement.
Well, yeah, we had an email exchange between me and the team. No one got too upset. But the funny experience of that was that, like, for a while I was tagged in the pinned tweet of her profile for like a number of months. And so anytime that some weird, frankly, really deranged, like, MAGA person wanted to get online and like just tweet an angry, mean thing at Ocasio-Cortez, I would get a notification because they would often just like tweet at the top, tweet on her page. And so it would like show up in my page. And so for a brief little bit, I got to see what I imagine is only a tiny snapshot of the just like disgusting harassment that she gets on Twitter. But I certainly hope that she doesn't even bother to, look at the replies on Twitter. She has better things to do.
Considering the amount of flack she gets just for being who she is, I'm sure she's got to be used to it by now, or at least have a slightly tougher skin than the average person to be able to survive.
I think she's a pretty serious person.
Cool. Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to know from the other perspective of that event, go check out episode 132 of Around the Lens. Jose talks about shooting that event along with a bunch of other topics that we had that evening. All right. Any other questions for Scott before we move on to Ben's photograph? No. All right. Moving on. Ben, I didn't know you doubled as a wedding photographer. That's great. Let's go ahead and pull up your image here. This is from the royal wedding, I'm assuming. Or just some play actors doing some good cosplay here. So this photograph is
the actual one.
Harry and Meghan kiss on the steps of St. George's Chapel shortly after being married. So tell us a little bit about this. Obviously, the wedding was the big deal event of the time of the year. So talk to us about getting sort of credentialed for this event and kind of getting the shot.
Sure. So this event, this position for the event was handed out on a pool rota basis because obviously you can't have hundreds of photographers stood outside the chapel door. So in this instance, there were 3 photographers there. It was quite a lucky occasion that I was given this position. So AFP were pooling the images with Reuters and Getty and AP. It was these positions were handed out and you didn't really know which position you were going to get until quite close to the event. So when I was given this position, it was a privilege, and it also came with 1 or 2 nerves maybe along with it. because I mean, obviously, as they exited the chapel, the picture that everybody wanted to see was the first kiss, as I'm sure everybody does at every wedding.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the moment, which fortunately went well.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously you weren't inside the chapel. You weren't actually getting the actual wedding. You were getting this. This is where is this in relation to the chapel? Like, is this just right outside the chapel, or is it?
Yeah, so the chapel, as I'm sure you can imagine, has a few different entrances and exits. So this is at the back of the chapel, and they exited the door at the top of quite a large staircase. So this door, before the wedding, saw Harry and William enter the chapel, and after the wedding, it was just the family members who exited from this exit.
How many other photographers were outside as well that were able to get pole position?
Outside of where I was?
Yeah.
There were I think there were 3 or 4 of us in total.
Extremely limited.
Very limited. There were on the day many different positions around Windsor Castle grounds. So, I mean, I think from what I understand, they were the royal couple were quite keen on not having a huge amount of photographers, but they had many different positions because there were so many opportunities. After they exited the chapel, they got into a horse-drawn carriage and processed through the grounds of the castle and then through Windsor itself and down the Long Walk. So in total, you know, it was a vast event to cover. So really it was about having many different positions and covering all of them and pooling the images so that all of the agencies could benefit from the production.
How many photographers do you think there were in total covering this? And were there any wire photographers inside the chapel covering the actual wedding itself?
The number of photographers, I can't imagine. I mean,
hundreds?
I would say hundreds.
Okay.
I would say hundreds. I can't verify that in any way.
Quote unquote, hundreds of photographers.
You heard it here.
Yeah. So, I mean, AFP, we had, I think, about 8 photographers in total, and that was pretty much covering our pool position quota. So, I mean, you know, multiply that by, 5 agencies and add on top of that all the freelancers also, which there were positions at the end of the Long Walk, a huge stand there. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it was within.
How far in advance did you know you were going to be shooting this event?
I knew that I was going to be shooting the event pretty much from when the engagement was announced. The position that I would be in for the event, however, was a lot closer to the date, possibly around 2 weeks, I would say, at the most. And then actually seeing where we would be stood in relation to the chapel was pretty much on the day before we managed to get in and have a look. So yeah, it was quite interesting, not quite knowing what you were dealing with. It's not a position that I've been in the chapel once or twice to photograph the Queen doing various things, but this particular side of the chapel isn't used a great deal, so it wasn't a position that I was at all familiar with.
But you ended up getting a great shot
out of it. And back to your question. It's a nice shot. The light on the day was, as I'm sure you can see, it was a very bright day.
I think one of 3 days you get, one of 3 sunny days you get in England, right?
Well, this is it, and whenever they're sunny, they're always over the top and blisteringly hot with it.
Can't win.
But yeah, so it kind of it had its own challenges in that as they exited the door, it was quite a nice picture just of them walking into the light. But then when they hit the light, you know, it just became incredibly hot. So doing an automatic exposure wasn't really viable. So it was just a case of really trying to, you know, knock it down and then kind of hope that you had hit it okay. But yeah, it was quite a harsh light, as I'm sure you can see from the image there.
Yeah, but you made it work. And what were you shooting with?
So fortunately, Nikon had just released their 180 to 400 lens. Mm-hmm. In fact, sorry, they hadn't quite released it. So AFP were lucky enough to receive 2 of these lenses
nice.
Shortly before it was released. So I had that lens, which was a godsend, really, because, you know, it just gave you the ability to pull the zoom, and, you know, so you could have the tied images, but also, you know, everybody wants to see a full length, and they want to see the dress and everything else. So it was really nice to be able to stand there with a lens instead of, you know, trying to juggle, because these events often have moments that you could quite easily miss. So it was nice to just be able to stay on one lens and shoot it, and that was on a D5, which is we have as staff we have 2 D5s. But yeah, it was nice just to hold one camera, like Scott was saying earlier.
Nice. Yeah, isn't that that's an F4, right? The 180 to 400, or isn't that an F4 or something crazy like that?
I believe so. Yeah, and it also has the 1.4 converter built in.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that lens like extremely expensive?
Fortunately, I don't have to buy these things.
So
I'm a little bit ignorant to the cost of these things, but I would imagine it wouldn't be cheap.
It's a little bit. I think we had a comment here by Brandy Ann Sperry, who said the shot is amazing. So there you go. Congratulations.
Many thanks. Many thanks.
If Brandy likes it, then that's all that matters.
Well, that's it.
And what did it feel like to be featured on CNN's Top 100?
Yeah, it was fantastic. I wasn't entirely aware of this straight away. But it's it's nice to at the end of every year kind of have a look through these galleries and appreciate imagery that's come to it from around the world, and then when your own image pops up, then, you know, it's a great feeling, and it's nice to be part of something like that.
Definitely.
It's a real privilege.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our main topics this evening. The first one was brought to us by Zach, who's not here tonight, but Zach wanted me to make sure I plug this, and I'll be featuring it at the end of the show. But Zach did a deep dive sort of exploration of the Nikon Z6 and his personal thoughts on it. You can check that out on YouTube right now, but I will be including the audio at the end of this show, so if you're listening to it as a podcast, it'll be right there, right after the outro. So go ahead and check that out, and what you'll see is what we're going to be starting doing soon is putting a lot more of this content, you know, these sort of like non-podcast related content, you know, reviews, previews, impressions, whatever we create. That's actually going to be going onto our Patreon page first. So if you want to see any of the content we produce like that first, just head on to our Patreon page, throw us a buck, and you get early access to everything we produce, and then it'll eventually show up on, you know, the other platforms. But again, that'll be the first place to get anything I can do to help plug the Patreon. Let's see if we get past that $1 mark. We got our first $1. Let's try and get to 10, huh? Come on, support visual journalism discussion, guys. Anyways, our first topic this evening is about the double standard that comes into play when, you know, news agencies or newspapers or people create, you know, talk about news, publish photographs of sort of death and destruction and dead bodies and whatnot. And there's this discussion here that's attached to the link that I sent out between Bob Garfield and, I'm going to butcher this name, Kanaz Amaria. Basically, they're talking about, again, the sort of double standard with regard to, showing death and destruction and dead bodies from like a country like Africa or somewhere, it's not the United States, and sort of the disrespect that shows towards the bodies. So I'm going to read a little bit from the transcript between the conversation between the two of them. Part of this, I think, kind of goes to the heart of the matter, and then I'll throw it to you all for your discussion, what you think about it. But basically, Kanaz says, "The Times said, and I quote, 'We want to be respectful to the victims and to those affected by the attack.' And then there's a but. But we also believe it's important to give our readers a clear picture of the horror of an attack like this. I think the conversation," that's unquote, "I think the conversation that we should be having is much broader. A more introspective look at how media has viewed and documented and published the issues and lives around people from other countries, mostly developing countries, as opposed to how we have published images and viewed people from developed countries. Kenyans didn't wake up and one day see this image and decide, we need to push back and say take this image down because we feel it's disrespectful. This stands alongside decades of coverage of their own community of different African countries. So, for example, I've been photojournalist for about 20 years. Every time I go to a photojournalism conference, I guarantee to see carnage of black and brown bodies and not the same amount of carnage of, let's say, white bodies. Why? Because photojournalism is defined by images of destruction, death, and violence towards the most vulnerable and poorest people around the world." So what do you guys think of this? And what do you think about, like, again, covering, death, destruction, conflict in general? Anyone want to throw? I'll leave this up to whoever wants to go in first.
I guess the question is, like, which one of us feels like they've done that kind of work themselves and can speak from personal experience. I don't know.
Or personal experience, or what you think of the kind of the idea of it. Do you think that this is a prevalent? Do you think that she's right? Is what she's saying true, or is this just her perspective on the matter? Like,
I personally think she's 100% right. I firmly agree with what she had to say, and I think that the on the media segment that transcript comes from was framed in a pretty responsible way, and maybe about as good as you can expect, like, non-photojournalists to have a discussion about this kind of thing in the industry, outside of, like, a specifically photojournalism type of context. Yeah, when you guys picked the topic for this, I was, like, both kind of excited, really excited, because I think it's really important and, like, something that's really good and necessary to talk about. But I was also a little apprehensive because I think, like, we got to acknowledge that, like look at this web chat right now. Like, we got 4 white guys talking about, like, the coverage of, conflict zones where, it's almost always a black or brown, either person who's been injured or, in some way gone through some sort of horrific experience. And so, like, we're coming at this from, like, a huge position of pre-existing privilege. And I think that's just got to be, like, the point of departure for any sort of discussion that we have about this. Ideally, there would be someone from one of these communities also chiming in, but obviously for a lot of reasons, not just about podcasts, but about staff roles and, photographers in general and freelancers and who gets work and who doesn't. There are reasons that go very deep as to why there's a representation gap in this type of thing. But yeah, I think the Times response was pretty laughably weak. And the fact that they, the kicker of that interview was that they didn't send an editor to respond to this conversation. And it's not like On the Media from WNYC is some little podunk operation, wasting an editor's time asking it. Like, that's a serious, like, news commentary organ. And, for the Times to just be like, sorry, we don't have someone who can do this, I think spoke to their, like, lack of commitment to really standing by this justification that they gave for running that photograph. We can talk all day about, like, the more kind of conceptual and maybe aesthetic or sociological ramifications of, like, people seeing death and destruction from a community that isn't their own. But if you want to judge this question just based on the justification that the Times gave for running it, I think it's pretty obvious that they just, like, they didn't want to in any way have to answer for what they did. They just changed it in order to get away from people yelling at them. So, I'm fully on her side in this discussion.
Do you think that, if the Times is to be fair, they should show death and destruction of equal measure of, folks at home, at, like, for instance, when there's death and destruction, at home? Or do you think that they shouldn't show death and destruction at all, which is sort of the lesser of two evils, so to speak? Because it's like, I get what they're saying, again, with the, they didn't respond, but they had the boilerplate sort of like, yada yada, showing the, visual. Here they say their quote is, stands alongside decades of visual coverage explaining. Oh no, that's okay. Again, their thing is showing, the harshness of war and conflict and stuff like that. But again, what do they do? Do they not show the death and destruction of overseas, and then not be fair to everybody, not show everything, or do they show everything and just take, obviously, they're obviously going to get a lot more letters and responses if they show Americans who are dying in death and some scene like this. So
I don't know. Ben, have you been in this situation? Have you had to shoot this kind of stuff, or heard discussions at AFP about what's the right thing to do?
Yeah, I know, because the Europeans take sort of a lesser sort of, I've seen extremely bad stuff, death and destruction in European and UK newspapers that I would never see published in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I haven't been in this situation myself. I don't know if you guys remember, but a year or two ago there was a terror attack on Westminster Bridge, where a guy drove a car over the bridge and hit quite a few pedestrians, and then attempted to gain access into the Houses of Parliament. And during this time, a colleague of mine from Reuters was on the bridge doing general views of Parliament, and witnessed this attack. And his first port of call was actually to go and get help for these people. And then when the help came, he continued with his job and took some extremely harrowing images of victims, which, as far as I know, as you rightly say, appeared in some European media, not in the British media. But as a result of this, there was quite a backlash from the internet and some public about how he could possibly photograph this, and this could possibly be published. And personally, I find that is quite an irony, with people, British public, willing to look upon situations that we're discussing and see images from far-flung corners of the world and have a look at the harrowing pictures from there. And in some way, it's more acceptable than when it's on their own doorstep. It's a very is kind of a tough call. I guess it's personally, I think it's this stuff should be seen, but the way that in this instance it's been handled it's been handled very badly. That's what I would say.
Yeah. It's certainly a very tough topic to deal with as a journalist, as a photographer, to show something that's that graphic, and it's the type of thing that I kind of agree with you. There, a lot of media nowadays, especially Americans, wants the spectacle of sex, the spectacle of blood, the spectacle of violence, and I think we're publishing for sometimes the wrong reasons, and it's for ratings and to sell and instead of inform. And I think there's a respectful way to present media and a disrespectful way, and I think it tends to cross the line sometimes, and that line is what needs to be constantly evaluated on each of these circumstances, and that sometimes they do go over it. A lot of times they go over it.
I think also that, like as Scott said, it's also how it's handled when when you've made that decision on where the line stands. If you're questioned upon it, then you should handle it in a respectful way also.
Yeah, and I think beyond, it's important for photographers to talk about this, but I also think that a lot more of the power, and we can all try to gather around the table and agree that we all need to be better, but a lot of the power that's being held with these real decisions of who sees what lies in the hands of editors. And Absolutely. So I looked at I don't know if I assume you're not going to bring up the picture in question on the screen, which is fine because it's pretty rough. But
only if I had an equally destructive picture of white Americans in America. If I could show them side by side, but if I can't do it 1-to-1, I won't do it.
Let's not fall into the trap that we're trying to dig into here. But yeah, so this guy, this AP photographer, I looked up his name, Khalil Sanosi. I'm sure he's a really hardworking and talented photographer, but another issue is just that picture is not that stellar of a photo. And that's not his fault for shooting it wrong or using the wrong settings on his camera or whatever. But it's a picture of nothing happening, of a few tables on a balcony, and there's corpses slouched over tables. It's basically a landscape photograph. And so there were other images that he shot that you can see if you just do a bit of Googling from that same day and filed to the AP that show so much more humanity of, people, running into the arms of soldiers and security guards and people, watching out in fear. And, it shows a lot. If you want to cover that story, and I think everyone would say that, that's a story that should be covered in the international press. You have a multitude of other options as far as what you could have ran with. And so the fact remains that an editor at the New York Times and at several other outlets specifically looked at what had been in the AP pool and chose that picture. And so the problem is when you're, and I'm sure Ben, you'd probably think about this every single day, when you shoot, especially for a wire service, your editor's tastes and preferences and what that outlet kind of wants and expects are always in your mind. And so at some level, given how replaceable wire photographers are from one day to the next, you can't afford to not take a shot, even if it's a shot that you don't feel all that comfortable with. If I had to guess, Khalil probably took that photo with a really sinking feeling in his stomach because obviously it's a very grisly scene, and there also might be a dark part in your mind where that this might be the picture that just becomes the very reductive, visual tale of the story, even though he witnessed, obviously, from his pictures, so many other, much more human and humane moments on that day. So I think this is a conversation that hopefully photographers someday grow up to be editors, but and so if we talk about it as photographers, we can keep trying to keep this conversation going, but I think at some point the power really needs to be addressed, and I think the editorial decisions are so much more powerful as far as an industry-wide impact than an individual photographer just saying, what, I'm never going to photograph dead bodies anymore, or if I shoot in a conflict zone in Africa, then I'm going to spend the next year shooting in rough neighborhood in the U.S. just to keep things equitable. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think she says something interesting later on where she's talking about the what we as sort of Americans or whatever, or those, we're only interested, or we only care about what's going on in a foreign country when we see the death and destruction type stories, and we can visualize, because we hear about it all the time. Oh, there's a bombing in Iraq and it killed 50 people inside of a bazaar, or there's some other thing. It's we're all so disconnected from those international stories, especially us in America. Maybe less so when you're in London or in the UK because you're closer tied to Europe, and I know they're a bit more aware of that type of thing. But again, looking at the photograph here, which I'm not going to bring up, I'd say in terms of showing death and destruction, it's probably the most benign shot of death and destruction I've seen. In terms of, it's just, like I said, just some bodies slumped over tables. I don't see dismembered body parts everywhere. It isn't even that particular bloody, but it is you're like I said, it's not really even that dramatic or well shot of an image. I mean, it looks like it was shot with a cell phone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the question is necessarily like how much gore is too much gore. I think it's just that, like, these parts of the world and the conflicts, these parts of the world don't get covered all that much, just like period. And then the conflicts that happen with them don't get covered in the kind of like deeper and more nuanced kind of reportage way that we see a lot of American, quote unquote conflicts or like white Western conflicts happening. Right. Think about all the reportage that's happened on the opioid crisis in the United States, and how there have definitely been some like very, very grisly, like rough images that have come out of that, but they have almost always been accompanied by like a much like wider and you could say more humanistic photo essay type approach to the reporting. Whereas like I think the issue is just that if there's going to be any reporting coming out of Kenya at all, it's almost always going to be about, like rough, bad things happening. And the fact that this one image was the image that got chosen, where there isn't even like a damn living human in it, is what people I think have a justifiable reason to be angry with. I don't think it's about the fact that it's like a body. It could have been a bloody handprint, or it could have been a bullet through a window pane or something like that. Like just like show some people. Show some living humans experiencing this. And the Times argument is like, we need to show shock in order to foster empathy and to create a human connection. And this is our humanistic mission and stuff like that. Well, then like show a human being that a viewer can connect with, rather than a dead body that's just going to be, a piece of, like a piece of meat sitting there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel very strongly about this, and I read my Susan Sontag this morning, and I'm ready to roll, guys. So, like, I don't know. Sorry, help me to monopolize the conversation.
No worries. No worries. All right, great. Well, any other comments on this topic before we move on?
Good place to move on.
Definitely. Well, I think, again, it's a tough issue. And I think I do want to bring up one thing, though, and it was brought up actually by one of our photographers who was on the show a few weeks back, talking about his documenting wildfires. And he talked about an anecdote where, he came across a situation where he was, able to photograph someone who was dead, a dead body, died from the fires. And he shot that, but when he came back, he couldn't bring himself to send it to his agency because he knew that would be, grabbed on, it would be focused on, and then, that would be the focus point. And it's I asked him, like, how do you balance, wanting to show off the grisly nature and the death and destruction of a, wildfire, but, again, not wanting to exploit death to kind of, propagate what might be an agenda for the editor. So that's one thing I want to say is that, you may, as a wire photographer, shoot death and destruction, but, you don't necessarily have to upload that image, right?
Yeah, but then, like, if someone else uploads that image, and like you're working for Reuters, and then Getty all of a sudden has this photo that is considered incredibly sensational, your editor might come back to you and be like, "Hey, why didn't you get that picture? Why didn't you get the shot?"
Yeah, no choice you have to make.
There's a real like pressure there, and some editors might be open and receptive to, hearing why you didn't feel like it was the right thing to do to run that image. And some editors might be a lot more cutthroat and be like, "Well, I'm not hiring you again."
Yeah.
So, this is the risk that you take.
Yeah.
I think also, often you don't always have the time to sit and contemplate these things. Yeah. If you're in a hard news situation and you're covering the story, you may not have the privilege of sitting down and thinking about it for a few hours afterwards. And
Absolutely.
You have to, like you say, your competitors will be sending pictures. At AFP now, we often send straight from the back of the camera. So, I mean, it would be quite easy to be sending images from the camera, and it's not always the situation that you can sit down and truly sort of think about it. I mean, I'm not saying that's an excuse, but often in the world we live in, currently you're expected to send images extremely quickly, and so sort of shooting a set, going home, having a good hard think about it, and then sending isn't, unfortunately, an option that we have very often in this day and age.
Brewing some tea, having a drink about it, think about it.
This is it. If only it were the case, but unfortunately, those days have gone. Certainly, where agencies are involved.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to something a little bit lighter, talking about tech. A lot of you have cameras that, again, I don't know what level of video you might do shooting with your cameras, but I know that our resident Sony shooter here, Travis, loves shooting video. In addition to still, you do shoot video, right, Travis?
I do.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Just making
You're not
sure.
making it up.
I know you shoot great photographs. I didn't know what your video. Yeah. I know you have a great video camera in the form of Sony's. So, but of course, you don't have the ability to turn that screen facing forward like we do in our wonderful Panasonics, which I'm looking at right now, my GH4. But that's okay, because you can get an external monitor like the Atmos Shinobi or Atmos Ninja. Atmos is making all of these awesome external monitors for your cameras. And Travis, you just sat down with somebody from Atmos. Tell us a little about that and your overall experience with the product.
Yeah, I've actually used their products before, and when I bought my first A7S, which had 4K but not 4K in camera, you had to shoot external to a device. So I bought the Shogun from Atmos, and it was fantastic and made life easy. And it definitely, between focusing and framing and stuff like that, it's an amazing tool to add to make your camera really more of a professional piece of equipment to shoot video. And now that they're shrinking those between companies like Small SD and Atmos is now, between their Ninjas and now the Shinobi, which is a 4K little monitor that you can just pop on, and you can just, shoot these great videos and running gun. You can use it on the side of a gimbal. You can do all kinds of great stuff with it. These things are just getting fantastic and sort of, something that you have to have in your bag if you're going to be shooting video now.
And how do you use it? I mean, do you have it like on top of your camera, or do you have it like set up as part of like a rig? Do you have the whole cage set up going on, or how are you using it? I have. Well, depending on the type of setup or what I'm going to be doing. If I know I'm going to be doing a lot of tripod work and stuff like that, I'll have it on top of the camera, and I do have a cage for it. But there's a lot of times I'll run and gun, so I'll keep it really small with the cage and the handle or something like that, and throw the monitor on top, and it just allows you to really kind of get down low or down up high and really see what you're doing without worrying about the back of the screen and stuff like that. And it's just an incredible tool. It works fantastic. Especially Atmos is just really, there's sort of like, how people are, really the standard in the business on making the best professional product for you to use on a situation, and they definitely have nailed it. And they keep it's like you see DJI is like, no drone company keeps upping them because they keep coming out with these great products. It's the same way Atmos is handling their new products. They're just always upping themselves. You'll buy something and then suddenly, a year later, they're like, oh, that was so much better. But that's good because it gives you, they keep pushing the technology. It just keeps getting better. Yeah, no, I'm definitely intrigued by these. I've got an external monitor I bought probably like 8 years ago now, and it's just a simple monitor. You plug it in because I needed it for when I was doing shooting with the Canon 5D Mark II, because that screen doesn't go anywhere. It's stuck on the back of your camera. Do you ever use the monitor like pointing towards you, like a front facing for like a selfie cam?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if I didn't have a laptop or something like that, or if I was shooting myself. A lot of bloggers are using these things now, especially on those cameras, your Sonys and stuff like that, so they can just flip it around and have a little handle and really see exactly what they're doing, watch their frame and focus and stuff like that, and it just makes it's a no-brainer. It fits right in your bag. It's so small that it's a piece of equipment that you kind of have to put in there.
Scott or Ben, does this piece of equipment, intrigue you guys? Are either of you guys shooting any video for your wires or for freelance? Is this something you'd be interested in?
It kind of scares the hell out of me. Video is something that I have done almost never for a work capacity. I, kind of tell myself every year, every 6 months that I really need to get my act together and learn how to shoot more video and stuff. I think I have a pretty decent handle on the mechanics of shooting like videography.
Yeah.
But as far as like editing and kind of everything that goes into, you know, making the whole finished product like a really professional piece of work, there's a lot going on there. And, you know, the level to which even the discussion of, you know, these screens, which I know are very necessary and useful. I've seen, you know, I've been on jobs where people are using them. You know, I've worked with video crews where, you know, they're capturing stuff and they're like literally controlling cameras via wireless connected screens from a different room and stuff. And it's just like astonishing at the level of what people can do now with very small handheld things. But this isn't anywhere. I don't have any business trying shopping around for one of these. I don't think. Yeah.
It's not in your toolkit. Not something you're gonna add to your toolkit anytime soon.
What's great about it also, I've used it for stills and stuff like that, where sometimes I'm putting a camera in a tight spot or a place where I cannot see the back of the camera. So I can literally, you know, put this out and look at this monitor and shoot, you know, from like 10 feet away and know that's, you know, exactly what I'm getting. Sometimes, you know, if you put it in a car in a space or someplace that there's no way you're going to see the back of that camera, that you can use it as an external monitor and really get the shot.
So, like, how expensive is this thing?
This thing's less than $400.
Oh, so, okay. It's not that bad.
Yeah. It's great. And and the resolution is 4K on this one, and it's a fabulous new. Yeah, the only I had prior to that was the small HD, which was great and small, but this one they upped the game on the 4K and everything like that. It's just really beautiful.
Now, if you want the one where you can stick a hard drive on it, and you can actually like record to the hard drive, that thing costs like what, $600, right?
Yeah, it's a little more. Yeah, they have the Ninjas and the Shoguns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The Ninja's probably closer to $1,000, I think.
Oh, really?
But,
Jesus.
But you can record straight to an SSD, and
right.
so you can it allows you to beat that 30-minute time limit on your Sonys or other cameras. You know, I know Panasonic I don't think has that 30-minute time limit, but
nope.
But on these ones it allows you to beat that, so it works great.
But Ben, I wanted to ask, like, is there a talk at AFP about, because I know like Reuters recently said that they're going to kind of meld videography and photography into one kind of like visual journalist role, and I think we're all kind of like hoping that the sky doesn't fall like immediately as far as every photographer expected to be a videographer and vice versa. Like, is there a talk at AFP about, like, because I mean now like video is probably just as saleable as photos for stuff, and they want to have rights to like wire serviceable video as well, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, AFP has a very extensive video department, so the two are very much segregated at the minute. The only time this ever crosses over for us is on a very rare occasion if I'm at a story which is a hard news story. I think the last time, I don't know if you guys heard of this over in the US, but the owner of Leicester City Football Club's helicopter crashed after a Premiership game.
Oh no.
And unfortunately, he was killed in the accident. And I mean, this happened pretty much right after the game. He always landed on the pitch and took off from the pitch, and so in that situation, they were never going to get a video journalist from London to Leicester, which is kind of in the Midlands of England. So on that occasion, I shot what we call a web clip, which is a very basic, maybe 5 or 10 30-second segments of video from a static position, which I then sort of edit. I'm in no way an expert on editing video, I can assure you, and so it's kind of a measure when needed. We will do it, but we are certainly not competing for a videographer role in any way.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm honestly surprised it's not been something that, your agencies or the people you work for have kind of pushed for, more so, just because, again, like for instance, in the general news business, like, every single newspaper, if they're not firing people, firing all their staffers, they're hiring people who can do photo, video, and on a freelance basis. So it's like, you have to be able to produce and give them not only, your 10 best shots with captions and everything, but also a B-roll package at least, if not B-roll plus interviews plus, something they can throw up in there for that, that content, for that video content. So again, it's almost surprising that it's not something that's more prevalent in your all's industry. But
I'm actually hoping that they still realize it is difficult to go from shooting photos to video, because if you're shooting one or the other, you're going to miss something.
Yeah.
So I think they still understand that you can maybe able to get some B-roll, but to actually switch your camera over, even on a Sony, it's easy enough to switch to video, but to do both at the same time, it's not effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're going to get two subpar products if you try and push people to get both, as opposed to one good thing.
I don't know anyone who's been asked to really do kind of too much of what, Ben, you just described, of like filing like, A-level photos, but then also shooting video like right at the same moment. I think it's a bit more understandable, but still kind of unfortunate that what people are really looking for is like, oh, you know how to work a camera, you know how to work something with a lens, well then you're going to do video today and photos tomorrow and video for the rest of the week and then photos again, and you have to be able to use Lightroom just as well as Premiere and all that stuff, and you never really like focus on one thing, and like, as long as that's like maybe separate project to project, afternoon by afternoon, I could see it a bit more reasonable. Being expected to like shoot and then immediately hit the back of the camera to start recording and stuff, and then go back to shooting and have to perform triage as to like what you would want to get a still of and what you'd want to get video of, that's pretty damn bleak. As far as
what might happen in the near future with technology and stuff like that is these cameras get to 8 and 10K. You'll be able to shoot this video.
No, dude, no.
I know you don't like that. I know you don't like the sound of that, but that could happen.
I mean,
I know you don't like that, but it could happen.
One of my best friends always says the second that the NPPA recognizes a 4K video still as being like a valid photography image, it's over. Like that's
and that's the scary thing, man. That's what scares me about it. And it is something to think about.
Well, it's not a future thing. As far as I'm seeing, it's a now thing. I mean, you're seeing it now more than ever, where people are taking 4K stills and just presenting that, because it's like, again, when the web is the primary platform for absorbing this information, when your cell phone is the primary platform for absorbing this information, a 4K still is fine. It's it's probably overkill in a lot of instances too. So I'm surprised, again, they're not telling you, just go out and shoot 4K video and then come back, pick a couple stills, we'll use that, and then give us your B-roll package. That's all we need. That's all we need. It'll happen if it isn't already happening. But anyways, hopefully, I agree. Like, trying to have someone shoot both at one thing is, you're right. I think most people realize that's not going to be a positive thing. But having you switch back and forth is the way of the future. The way of the now. It's the way we're moving towards, what we're doing here in the Air Force and the military in general. They're combining all the career fields. So, you're going to have a trained person who can do photo, who can do video, who can do light graphics, who can do, writing, everything. They're going to be content creators. That's going to be their job title. So one day you might go out and shoot a video feature. The next day you might go out and shoot a portrait session. Next day you might go out and shoot, portrait photos. And then you come back and create some graphics and After Effects. So, it's the way it is. It's so. But I'm glad you two are.
I think personally, if that is your job title, then I guess that's what you're signing up for. But fortunately, it's not my job title, so I'm going to hold on to photography.
There you go.
It's like we're in the. It's like we're in the same moment of climate change, where it's like, well, everyone born after us is screwed, but maybe we might get to live out the last few years of a survivable climate.
The last
good for you two guys, in that you can still do that with just photography and photojournalism. So I commend you for that. All right, let's move on to our last topic this evening. Really quick, we're just going to talk about sensor cleaning. Of course, whether you're shooting mirrorless or whether you're shooting a DSLR, you've got a sensor that's exposed to light. That's how digital photography works. And at some point, you're going to get dust on that sensor, no matter how hard you try, no matter how quickly you swap out, the camera. You try and do the thing really try and quick. Just do a little. You're going to get dust on there. How do you deal with the dust? Let's throw over to you, Travis. How do you deal with those dusts on those Sony sensors?
Yeah, and that's certainly one of the problems that you have with a Sony sensor. And as soon as you take that off, you get that big, beautiful full frame sensor staring you right in the face.
I'd say it's even more prevalent with all the mirrorless because it's just. I mean, Canon does it right. They have the shutter comes down when you're changing the lens, but every other manufacturer is like.
Smart little thing to do. That was definitely a smart little thing to do.
Canon is the only brand that does that
for their mirrorless.
New one. Their brand new one actually has a little shutter that comes down that protects when you're changing. That's a brand new thing. And they're new mirrorless, but with the Sony, I'm very careful with when I shoot, but you're just going to have to do it. And so I always try and point down. I always try to wait for a non-windy situation, but I always carry a blower with me so I can just blow out my sensor. And I have on occasion when I know that there's a spot on it that if I'm out in Iceland or Cuba or something like that, and I'm not going to be able to get home to get cleaned, I bring a couple of sensor swabs with me and I will clean it. But I do it upon a real need, and you have to be kind of attentive when you're changing. If I know I'm going to be out in a dusty situation, I try to bring two bodies with two lenses so I don't have to change them, and avoid changing lenses in any situation where I don't know there's going to be dust or a non-prime area to change.
Guys, how about you guys? How have you dealt with like dirty sensors?
Never in the field intensely, where I guess. The amount of times that I clean my sensor is, probably 3-4 times a year, I think, when I'm like really feel like I'm getting into a deep clean of my gear. In those situations, I will just like do the mirror lockup on a 5D and use a little blower. And, I've been pretty lucky that I haven't noticed like a huge issue so far. Looking at the mirrorless and how that might be the future of just kind of like professional cameras in general, obviously it's going to need to be something that needs to be addressed a lot more closely. I didn't know that Canon was doing the whole cover the sensor thing, which just seems like it makes perfect sense, frankly. So hopefully that's something that kind of becomes a more widespread.
It's so new. I don't know how effective it is yet, but
yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah. When you eventually upgrade to the EOS R system.
Yeah. Once they make a good one.
That's right. With dual memory card slots. How about you, Ben? Any issues with sensor dust in your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, as we enter hopefully spring in the UK, I'm beginning to see that I desperately need a sensor clean. But I'm not a very good DIY kind of guy, so I like to send mine off to Nikon, or ideally often bump into the guys at a sporting event where they kindly take your camera away and it comes back sparkling clean.
Oh, that's so nice.
It's an amazing feeling, but it doesn't happen often enough. But yeah, I like to leave it to the professionals. And I think it's one of those things that personally I don't have the confidence to attempt on my own.
And that's certainly a reason to be, part of the pro service lines of whether it's CPS or pro services. You get a couple free cleanings a year, and certainly the expo events they have there. You can't get your camera cleaned for free and stuff like that. So take advantage of that. So there's plenty of time
for sure.
To get it. And I know Sony has walk-in places in New York, and they're expanding around the world in LA and stuff like that. You can walk in and get your sensor cleaned. So, they're in tune with it. You don't have to do it yourself. You're not alone.
Yeah. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
It's scary, It's
that's the lifeblood. Luckily, there's a little piece of glass there, so people are more scared, I think, of ruining their sensor, which they're probably not actually doing. But you don't want to mess with it if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I've done the actual sensor cleaning where I bought the swabs and the liquid and I wiped the sensor, and that's the most nerve-wracking thing in the world because you got this $3,000 camera and you're just like, okay, here we go. And it's like I've never been able to get everything, Like I got the big splotches, they're covering up like they're showing up in the main area, and they're like, even if you're shooting at the lowest aperture, it's like a big blotch. I gotten rid of that stuff, but there's always like little bits and pieces on the periphery that you can't get rid of unless you're getting that true professional cleaning. So thankfully I've never had to do my GH5. I think, modern cameras, they've got that nice sort of vibration capability to, knocks off most of the big junks. And honestly, if you're shooting low enough aperture, you don't even notice it most of the time. It's only when I'm pumping up to like 22, f22, where it's like, oh, yep, there's all that dust. Yep. But yeah, I agree. If you can get your stuff done professionally, get it done professionally. Don't do it yourself. And if I were to do it, I wouldn't do anything more than the blowing. I'm not going down that like swabbing route again if I can help it.
Yeah, it's scary.
The gel tips and all that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's. It's just again. I've had my experience, had my fun. I don't need to do that again. All right, guys. Well, that's gonna wrap up this week's show. I want to throw it over to Ben. Let's throw it over to you, Ben, first. Is there anything you'd like to direct people towards that they can check out? Your website or some sort of resource you'd like people to know about?
I mean, always feel free to check out the AFP Wire for world news. And yeah.
And benstansall.com, right?
Yeah, you can also have a look at that. My website could do with a little bit of
Could they come watch you race on a bike or something, or?
You could also do that. I don't know how impressed you would be, but you're always welcome. So I'll let you know where to head for in the UK.
Nice.
It's a fun day out where you are now, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Scott, what would you like to plug?
Let's see. I want to plug my friends. I encourage people to check out the work of people like Christopher Lee, Caitlin O'Hara, Alex Flynn, Chris Jones, Mark Abramson, Jason Bergman, a whole bunch of other friends. Ivan Flores, who's doing great work in Afghanistan right now. I mean, these are people that I just am so privileged to call friends, and I'm inspired by their work every day. I wish and hope that other photographers working out in the world have, a community of photographers that excite and challenge them and criticize them that they can, commiserate with. And yeah, I guess my stuff, my name's Scott Hines on everything if people want to see my stuff for whatever reason. And the last thing I would say is that if there are photographers out there who are freelancers and feel like they're frustrated at how kind of fractured and powerless people are, I kind of talked about how like it's easy to feel replaceable as a freelancer. I really encourage you to get in touch with me. Email, Instagram, Twitter. I'm involved in a couple of informal and informal projects to try and help make the freelancing experience a little bit better for we the workers.
Yeah.
And so really sincerely, don't hesitate to reach out to me if this sounds like something that you're interested in and you happen to be listening to this. So yeah.
Okay, great. Yes. And that's ScottHinesPhoto.com if you're looking for the direct link to the website. You can also find that on the show notes for tonight's page, both the links to Ben's page and Scott's page. And listen to all the stories we talked about tonight. And let me throw it over to you, Travis. What do we got?
Well, Scott, I got to say, I got an idea. I'm actually the chairman of APA New York, American Photographic Artists. And I think we could sit down and have a nice little talk with our photographers, because we're a community of photographers that would love to hear something like that. And I think it would be a great little workshop that we could put together.
Yeah, so, sure.
If anyone's interested in that, and get in touch with us, and let's make that happen. If anyone wants to follow up on anything on Around the Lens, make sure you check us out. And you can check me on my personal Instagram at TWKEYES. And can't wait to see you next week. We got an exciting show.
Indeed. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
I just want to remind everybody, we've got a lot of great content on the website, aroundthelens.com. And again, we're throwing a lot of video content on our YouTube page. So you can find links to that on our website. Again, in addition to obviously what Zach is doing with his exploration of the Nikon Z6. We got a lot of other things coming up down the line, previews, reviews of different gear and whatnot. So please go ahead and check that out and let us know what you think. But again, I want to thank you guys so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. For Travis Keys, I am David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 162, and we are out! Thanks for tuning into Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show, and hope you'll join us next week. In the meantime, go to aroundthelens.com for show notes from tonight's episode, as well as links to our Patreon, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. We're also always looking for new and exciting guests to feature on each show, so if you know somebody who might be interested, let them know.